Welcome to Leading with Artivism. Leading with Artivism is a live monthly interview series created and curated by Poet Gold in collaboration with Arts Mid-Hudson, featuring a diverse mix of artivists, artist activists who have taken up the charge through their art to highlight social issues. We invite you to ask questions and get an inside look at the hearts and minds of these courageous creatives.
Welcome everyone to Leading with Artivism, and we are here today with Victoria Munro. And welcome, Victoria. I'm going to first read her bio. Welcome to the show. Victoria Munro is a queer artist, educator, writer, and curator whose multifaceted practice bridges sculpture, public art, and cultural leadership. Her art practice is grounded in minimalism and material sensitivity, shaped through her long-standing affiliations with national and international reductive art groups such as Minus Space and PS Projects. Currently, Munro is the executive director and curator of the Alice Austen House Museum, an institution deeply rooted in queer history, where she stewards a site of LGBTQ+ visibility and storytelling. She also serves as board president of the Museum's Council of New York City and sits on both the Executive Leadership Committee of the New York City Parks and Open Space Coalition and the National Trust Historic Artists Homes and Studio Programs. As founder of the Queer Ecology's Garden Project at Alice Austen Park, Munro fuses environmental activism with queer theory, cultivating a living, evolving space that reimagines relationships between identity, land, and community. Her work across sculpture, curation, and ecological practice champions queer presence in both natural and institutional spaces. Welcome, Victoria.
So much, Gold. It's lovely to be here with you in this space tonight.
I'm glad we were able to make this happen. So I'd like to start here by asking you to offer a brief background on the Alice Austen House, which is a national landmark for LGBTQ+ narratives, specifically, not just historically, if I'm correct, and who Alice Austen was.
Yes, and excuse me, I am calling in from home, and there are 4 different animals that will perhaps make this more entertaining. Alice had black cats and photographed them. So the Alice Austen House, well, we can't talk about the house yet. We have to talk about Alice. She was born in 1866, and I'm going to do this because my glasses are picking up the computer screen, and lived until 1952. And, you know, hers is a story that is just so incredibly compelling. And you know, I have to say that I first visited the Alice Austen House because I was just checking out spaces in New York City, parks and things that sounded interesting, but there was very little online about Alice at the time. And this was back in around 2007. And I visited the Alice Austen House and I came inside and I thought, well, this is a very quaint cottage. And I didn't spend a lot of time inside because it was interpreted as a historic home. So there's lots of antique furniture, roped off rooms. So there wasn't a lot of space to move around. It's a small cottage on the most beautiful waterfront park that you can access via coming on the Staten Island Ferry or driving over the Verrazano. Anyway, I left and I didn't know that Alice was a lesbian, and I didn't have an understanding. Perhaps I didn't look deeply enough, but it wasn't apparent on the surface that she was a photographer. And as an arts professional, both a creator and a curator, and someone that's worked in the photographic field for many years, and also a lesbian, that would have been completely profound to me.
Right.
And a few years later, I was working in a print workshop, and the monitor was the education director for the Alice Austen House. And she asked me, understanding my educational background, if I would be willing to write women's history programming for the house. And that's when I found out the story.
Got you. That's the connection.
And I was just, honestly, it's been a vocation ever since. Because I could not believe that I didn't have that experience when I visited. And I wanted everyone, queer or not, to be able to have that understanding and the insight into this absolutely terrific archive of around 8,000 images of a changing New York City, a changing America, travels to Europe, and of course, women's history and LGBTQ history.
Right. So through the photos and the narratives and the storytelling.
It's her photographs that lead the way, Gold.
Right. Got you.
100%. And so it really became a mission to reinterpret the historic house that's been open since 1985. We have a 15-acre public park that, like I said, it's on the waterfront. It's just a fantastic place to visit, have a picnic. But there's many reasons to revisit because we have a contemporary arts program.
Okay.
The initial friends of the Alice Austin house that helped save the house from demolition included people like Bernie Sabat and Edward Steichen, like just powerhouses, and also queer folk. And they had wanted it to be a living, breathing photographic museum, which is what it is today.
Now, when was it designated a national landmark? Because I know that took place at some point. Do you know?
So it became designated. I've just lost my screen.
Can you see me? I can see you.
I found you again. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Why don't we let us put up also the interior of the house. I believe we have a photo of that as well.
So this is the dining room, which formerly only included one photograph of Alice Austin's that was a tree. And it was filled with antique furniture. And this is important to talk about too, because that furniture didn't belong to Alice.
Okay.
So it was an interpretation, which I don't agree with doing in historic houses.
Right.
Because it's a false narrative. And how are we expected to just relate to furnishings?
Right.
Especially when they're not authentic.
Right.
And so telling Alice's authentic story, the obvious way was through her photographs. She has so many important themes in her work. And so, you know, to be able to invite people into the space rather than keeping them out was so important to me. So
the house, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, so the house itself was built in 1690, the original structure, and it was renovated by Alice's grandfather in 1844 and turned into this Victorian Gothic cottage that it is today. But Alice and her partner of 55 years, Gertrude Tate, 30 of those years of their relationship were spent living in this home, were evicted in 1945. And Alice was forced to sell all of her possessions. And so they went out into the world. So, in fact, we don't have a lot of those material artifacts like chairs and tables and such.
Okay.
Because of that event. But what Alice knew was that her work was incredibly important. And she gave it for safekeeping to the Staten Island Historical Society. Where it had remained for the last 80 years and was just repatriated 2 weeks ago. Officially came back to the museum 2 weeks ago. So now we are the primary holder of the Alice Austin archive.
So the house offers a sense of visibility to women and lesbian women specifically during Alice Austin's time, who otherwise were virtually invisible. We can bring that slide down. Oh,
absolutely. So when we talk about that invisibility, it happens on so many levels, right? So there's this thinking about protecting someone from the homosexual gaze, right? So you erase that history so no one will know, right? And then there's closeting on the level of the archive. So the next 2 years, we'll be working with the repatriated archive to correct all the metadata and digitally publish all the photographs, make them accessible to everyone.
Wonderful.
Because queer histories are so often erased. And so we are really working at that precipice that's so threatened right now.
Right.
Of preserving this pre-Stonewall queer history.
Right. And actually, I'm going to jump ahead, because since we're on the topic of erasure, so to speak, and the climate of erasure of diverse histories, how important is the work that you do today? Because when I'm at the house, I find it to be a sacred space. Is it the same for you in that aspect?
Yeah, well, we take Alice's lead, right? So Alice, she formed all of these clubs. So what she did, I like to say, I often operate as a museum leader in a sneaky way, because I'm following Alice in a lot of respects. So I'm creating safe space.
Right.
So on the surface of it, we can look just like a historic house museum, right? Yeah, we're doing all this work with youth, also intergenerational work that is creating safe space to be really, truly celebratory of people's stories and the diversity of those stories. Alice was the founding member of the Staten Island Bicycle Club. She was the founding member of the Staten Island Garden Club. She had a club that was notorious called the Darned Club, a play on words, because her and her woman friends certainly weren't spending their time darning. And these clubs were relatively separate from men, but they were also activities that were considered newly okay for women to do without male chaperones. So the way I think about the house is a radical retreat. It's the space that you can come into, and for youth, no matter how they identify, they can get a pass to come and visit us. And it sort of celebrates them in lots of different ways that are really unexpected. So that's the really part of the important work.
And I think for the youth, it gives them an historic narrative of inclusivity, of what, and they may not get that someplace else.
Well, in actual fact, they don't even have an understanding that someone potentially, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, faced some of the same feelings of insecurity, and threatening environment that they do today. And it's a real comfort, actually. And it's a real call to action that we have to continue the work that we do. And that's really important. And a lot of young people that we work with, we do a queer photographic storytelling program. When I talk to them about queer elders, they say, "What is that?"
Queer elders.
Then they look at me and they're like, "Oh, right, okay." Yeah.
Right. Let's address your artistic practice and how you bring it into the space of the museum. I'm going to reread a statement in your bio, and you can expound on what it means and its relevance, particularly today. So it's stated in your bio: you fuse environmental activism with queer theory, cultivating a living, evolving space that reimagines relationships between identity, land, and community. Can we bring up the yes, thank you, this slide. Can talk to me about the intersection of all of that in relationship to what you do there.
Well, okay, so I was talking about the museum, and I think about the museum very holistically, but what's really important to being a community anchor is not expecting someone to cross the threshold of the museum. You should be doing the work in the community, outside of a space where someone may not feel welcome, even if you're trying to be as welcoming as possible. And so my work and my thinking around a lot of the artwork that I do or also support includes the outdoors. And after many years of trying to get this project funded, this image is of me with some of the New York Restoration Project team.
Okay.
Where they didn't give us money, but they gave us the people power and the supplies to plant the seeds for a queer ecologies garden. And queer ecologies is a philosophy, but it's also an action. And so every year we plant, I curate a different series of plantings with my staff and sometimes consultants working in the queer gardening world. Yes, there's us, to plant a range of different things that can feed into it, different plants that can feed into our programs that are non-binary, intersex, self-seeking, inherently queer, community-oriented plants. And this year, the iteration of the garden was all based around plants that we could also use for natural dyes in natural photographic practices. But what I do find is that I can work with a group of students, or the staff can work with a group of students that come to the house and they're a little shy and they're a little quiet, but once they hold a bulb in their hand, they may have never held a flower bulb, and they plant that bulb, it absolutely, they're talking and they're filming each other and they're taking photographs, and it's this amazing kind of moment that we're lacking in a lot of our teaching, which is that connectivity to the land. And students are incredibly traumatized by the idea of climate change and the real fact of climate change. So bringing them back into a gardening environment is also really important, aside from the fact that nature is inherently queer. And so this is just the most natural self-affirming space that they can be in. So this project is growing year by year. And I think also, COVID taught us that we need the outdoors more than ever.
Absolutely.
And so people are really searching for ways to also put down their devices.
Well, the schools, last year actually had no devices in the classroom, and it was, when I walked in, I was trying to figure out what's different,
I know. I remember asking you, because if folks don't know, Gold is our lead teacher on an incredibly special Theatres of Colour program. And the students were much more focused last year. And
Absolutely.
I said, what is the change, do you think? And you said, they've stopped having phones.
Yes. And it's interesting because, I think that everyone initially thought that there would be this major pushback. But somehow the school was able to do it, and the students actually have received it very well and prefer it. The conversations I've had, they enjoy not having it, that impulse to get on that phone at every waking moment. So it's
there's a lot of social pressures that come with the phone.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you had to give, since we're speaking of students or just people who come up as artists, if you had to give a younger activist or artist advice, what would you say to them in the pursuit of wanting to do community minded art?
Yeah, so that's like a multifaceted question, but on the very base level, what I would say to them is it doesn't happen overnight.
Hmm. Hmm.
You have to be persistent and engaged because you have to build trust.
Hmm.
So if you're working with the community, when I started this work of queering the museum, Staten Island is not the most queer friendly place, gotta
Right.
say. And everyone, that was all anyone could see. They were like, this executive director's come in and she's
Hmm.
just doing this and she's not doing any of the stuff that we love. And they realize that I do it all, but in a much more holistic way.
Hmm.
And I care about everyone.
Right. Of course.
I'm not going to discard who was a supporter in previous years of our museum when in its history, which I think is a little bit dark, where they didn't acknowledge Alice's true identity.
Right.
They're a part of the story. They're a part of that institutional history. They're a part of the neighborhood. And we're still 100% there for them as well.
Hmm.
And so it's really important to not be exclusive. Definitely know what your mission is. Like, I think that even as an individual that's doing this work, you can write yourself a mission statement.
Mm.
And if it can be as concise as hopefully one sentence, but maybe two, and each time you feel like, what am I doing? Oh my God, I got treated badly. Just go back to that statement.
Mm-hmm. Right, for guidance.
Yeah. So an individual doing this work can be mission driven because you have your mission, right? And that
Right.
mission also can evolve. But I like to think about it like a nonprofit should operate like a really good individual who's passionate about what they're going to do and what their approach is. It's the same with your art practice, right?
Right.
So I graduated art school in 1998, and always part of what I did was collaborative with my work. And the first thing I did out of art school was be a part of running an artist run space, which is now the oldest artist run space in New Zealand. That's my accent. I'm from New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of what I find is perhaps a difficulty with some artists in the way that they work, that they're only thinking about their own. And they're not thinking about that broader community, and they're not thinking about what they will gain by supporting other artists and building community.
Right.
Because while you're in art school, yeah, you've got the joy of having critiques or what have you. And I don't believe you have to go to art school at all to be an artist. 100% no. But only about 5% of art school graduates go on to make art after school. And I think the most important thing that you get from that time at art school isn't necessarily your tutoring, it's your friends.
Right. The relationships.
Absolutely.
The relationships. And you made a key point in your sharing that the collaborative relationships that you build, it's not just about your art, whatever medium that you're in, but how do you collaborate with others so that it's also about them?
Exactly.
And it becomes an inclusive relationship for both. So you sort of answered this, in there's a question from the audience, and the question was, how do you get your art into the community?
Oh, yeah. I say, first of all, if you're talking about your own personal artwork, I used to teach a million years ago. I used to teach this professional practice course for graduating students. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to say, don't stop thinking about getting it in the gallery. Think about how you can. What is an idea of a gallery? It can be a zine.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a flyer. It can be a poster. You can ask for a lend of a shop window. I think they're the best, and you don't have to do it through a program.
So broaden your definition of gallery.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
First off, 100%. And not be thinking about, oh, this is my painting. I have to sell my painting, right? How can I take that painting and maybe sort of reproduce it for more people to be able to consume it rather than it be a rarefied item?
Mm-hmm.
Like the way you could put your poetry in a book.
Right.
Right. And so suddenly you're busy with all of these ways to show and disseminate your work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the end goal may be that you want that solo painting show or to be included in that group show, but no one's asking you to make art. They're absolutely not.
Right.
And they're not going to. They're not going to be like, oh, please come knocking at your door.
Mm-hmm.
No, but if they start to see you integrating and doing, and like we were talking about collaborations, it may be that the end goal is that you want to see your sculptures or your painting or your photographs out there in the community. You will.
Right. Right.
But they're not going to come ask you for it. That's like a movie fantasy.
Right. It's a romance fantasy. Yes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, honestly, still, it's like I have dreams that I've run 10 miles on a treadmill and I'm feeling really super fit.
Right.
And I've just been offered a solo show. But yeah, it doesn't just happen. And, I often think, and, we're sort of, people will watch this from further afield than Hudson, but Hudson is a really wonderful creative hub. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things that are happening there. Mm-hmm. And you also have to go and partake in other people's art too.
Right. Absolutely.
It is about that community.
Right. I did an event in where was I? Ithaca, and I think it was there, and I was speaking to a room full of visual artists, mostly, and we talked about this very topic of how do you move your art, and I said, I'm surprised that most visual artists don't have like a YouTube channel, that you're speaking about your art or some type of video collective of your work. Those are things that you can do. Like you said, you become your own gallery, so to speak, virtually, to expose yourself to other mediums, information you can get.
Yeah, and when I started, there was not social media. Mm-hmm. So it was really like, using Kinko's.
Right. Yes, I remember Kinko's. The many days I made the Kinko's run. Absolutely.
But we did it. And, I even to my first set of visas here were journalist visas, because I was self-publishing magazines that were made at the copy shop. Mm-hmm. Featuring artists' work, and I would put a lot of energy into, finding the work, designing the work on barely functional computers and then printing them and hand folding them and stapling them. But they would have ISBN numbers. They would go out there into the world. They would be sold. They were really popular. They were limited editions.
Right.
And so I kind of just like made a whole career for myself out of being what I would say is my own portable gallery. I also built a portable gallery too before I became executive director of the Alice Austin House.
Now, when you said that you built a portable gallery, explain that. I mean, literally built like a portable gallery, or was it?
Yes, it was panels that all clicked together, that was on wheels, and I was asked to do an exhibition for Staten Island Arts when they had their art gallery in the Staten Island ferry terminal.
Ferry, yes. Mm-hmm.
But they had all these intense rules around the exhibition. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you're just not even allowing me just to show my work. So I built a portable gallery that I could put on the top of my car and drive down there and put together. And then the catalog was how to build your own portable gallery.
That's so smart. That's just so smart. So you are what I call the epitome of the artistpreneur.
Yes.
If it doesn't exist, create it.
Exactly. Right. So I was just like, okay, if you're going to put all these rules, foundations put so many rules on you, you get this, you're like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but they know what your work is. Mm-hmm. Then I was like, okay, so I'll make the gallery my work. I'll make a portable gallery. And that sort of embodies that whole sense of what I'm talking about. Of no one's going to knock on your door and say, I just want all of those beautiful paintings that you've done. Well, maybe it happens for some people. I don't know. But it's like the same thing within acting and everything. Right. Like we see so many Hollywood stars that are children of other famous people. And of course, they have a leg up into the industry. So us regular people, if you like to say, there isn't such a thing as regular people. We're all like amazing. But perhaps we don't have that front door.
Right, that access.
Yeah, access.
Right.
That's when, being really clever about finding ways. And what I say is that it's not just cleverness. It's a lot of time spent with you.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of giving back.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So this last question, I'm put it out there. It's from the audience again. It says, how does one get involved with the Artivists community? The other one was like, how do you get your art into community? But I guess the desire to be an artivist, to activate social consciousness, to activate the heart. For me, Artivism is about activating the heart. I feel like I can activate the heart, I can activate the mind, and bring people in from there. But what is that like for you? What would you say to that person that has a desire to be an artivist?
What a great desire. Right. Thank you. We need more of you. Volunteerism is step one. That's how you're going to meet your community that are artivists. And they are where you want to meet that artivist community. So sometimes you can, you go to a gallery opening or something, and it feels really intimidating, right? Right. There's all these people that seem to just know each other, and you don't. It happens to me all the time. And you can just, you don't feel like you can just rock up to them and start a conversation. But I tell you what you can do is that nearly every single museum and then smaller that aren't sort of museums, nonprofit institutions, has a volunteer program. And they're not asking you for 1 million hours a week. It might be to just help volunteer on events. And you're going to already know 15 people in the room from prepping to volunteer. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. This is great advice.
You get an instant in to the community, and like volunteering is the most essential thing.
Absolutely.
And it takes many forms depending on the institution, but within the art world, there's volunteer opportunities everywhere. And so at the Alice Austin House, like a lot of it is gardening. And we get into these like big conversations about plants and whatnot, and people just become like indispensable parts of the team. Also, like quite a few of our full-time staff members, they were volunteers.
For the Alice Austin House.
Yes, it also will get you a job.
Right.
You know, so we're not talking about some unpaid internship, or it could turn into an internship. But I've had people come to me and ask me to volunteer, and I start having a conversation with them, or they're having a conversation with staff members, other staff members. And my staff members will come to me and be like, oh, Victoria, I met this really interesting person that wants to volunteer, and I think you should actually have a conversation with them. Or vice versa. And we get to talking, and I'm like, whoa, how have we never met before? And they're like, oh, I've been coming to events, but I'm a bit shy. And I'm like, wow, you're amazing. You know, you need to be involved on a deeper level. And sometimes that also might translate to becoming a board member. Because we're a nonprofit, which is also a form of volunteerism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really do believe it. I believe in it a lot. And it's not like, oh, wow, I'll just be working for free for years. Don't think about it like that. Think about it as wanting to be involved in a community.
So volunteer folks out there, you heard it. Volunteer.
So I work full time and I serve for free on 4 boards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. No,
a lot of my time.
I know that space. Absolutely. So Victoria, this has been lovely. Can you give folks the website for Alice Austin, so if anyone wants to pay a visit or support Alice Austin House, they can.
Yeah. So really importantly, Austin is spelt with an E-N. That's how, often Google will, drive you back to us, but it's just aliceaustin.org. It's that easy.
aliceaustin.org. Let's put that up so our viewers will know how to connect with Victoria and the Alice Austin House. Victoria, thank you for joining us at Leading with Artivism. And to our online audience, I appreciate all of you for tuning in today and tune in for the future. Thank you for being present. Our next show will feature Rock Wilk in March when we start up in 2026, who is a multifaceted playwright and filmmaker. So thank you to the team here at Art Mid-Hudson for supporting our artistic community. And remember to live with gratitude, live with purpose, and live with love. I'm your host, Poet Gold. Have a wonderful night.